folks, and welcome to the second half of The Phantom Coach by Amelia Edwards. In the previous half, I talk a little bit more about her, so I won't bore you with the same spiel. We will dispense with that. Thank you for spending some time with me today. If you've been enjoying these videos, please like, subscribe, comment below, share the videos around so that other people can find these fantastic authors and these fantastic stories. As ever, if you would like to make a request for me to read a particular story, again, just leave it in the comments below, and I will look into it. And 9 times out of 10, it's perfectly fine. Before I pick up from where we left off, just the usual disclaimers in that these are Victorian and early 20th century stories, which means they may contain attitudes about race, gender, orientation, religion, all the usual suspects that modern people might find a little distasteful. So if that's something that doesn't appeal to you, please feel free to not consume the content. In addition, ghost stories and tales of horror and the macabre do tend to at least have some origin in circumstances like assaults, murder, suicide, just general unpleasantness. And again, if that is distasteful to you, please feel free to not consume the content. That's just sort of the 2 general warnings that I'm trying to actually remember to give at the start of each video. So just to catch you up from where we were last week, we have a young gentleman who is a newlywed who has gotten lost on the moors during a snowstorm. He sort of, I get why he did it, but he sort of invited himself in, following a servant home, a very gruff servant, into the home of a man who is a very, very strange, very isolated, hermit-like figure who is very much interested in the supernatural and has stated that he sort of was previously in the scientific community that he was then sort of drummed out of for being a supporter of the supernatural. He has, in response to our protagonist wanting to get home to his wife so that she doesn't worry, he has informed him that it would be possible for him to hitch a ride on a mail coach, which was a real thing. You could actually do that, to hitch a ride on the mail coach, and that will take him closer to where he needs to be without having to walk the 20 miles or so home to his wife in a blizzard, in a snowstorm. So that's sort of where we are now. The servant has walked him out the door and has put him on the right path to intercept this mail coach as it changes horses. So here we go with the second half of The Phantom Coach by Amelia Edwards. So he's just being left alone by the servant on the side of the road. This was no longer matter of the slightest difficulty, for, despite the dead darkness overhead, the line of stone fence showed distinctly enough against the pale gleam of the snow. How silent it seemed now, with only my footsteps to listen to. How silent and how solitary. A strange, disagreeable sense of loneliness stole over me. I walked faster. I hummed a fragment of a tune. I cast upon enormous sums in my head and accumulated them at compound interest. So he's doing math to take his mind off of things. That would just frustrate me. I would just get frustrated with my inability to do the math that I had come up with. There's a reason why I work in history and not in a STEM field. I did my best, in short, to forget the startling speculations to which I had but just been listening. Pardon me, let me try that again. I did my best, in short, to forget the startling speculations to which I had but just been listening, and to some extent I succeeded. Yeah, the servant did just get finished telling him about this horrible coach crash where everybody died, like right there on the side of the road. Meanwhile, the night air seemed to become colder and colder, and though I walked fast, I found it impossible to keep myself warm. My feet were like ice. I lost sensation in my hands and grasped my gun mechanically. I even breathed with difficulty, as though, instead of traversing a quiet north country highway, I were scaling the uppermost heights of some gigantic Alp. This last symptom became presently so distressing that I was forced to stop for a few minutes and lean against the stone fence. As I did so, I chanced to look back upon the road, and there, to my infinite relief, I saw a distant point of light, like the gleam of an approaching lantern. I at first concluded that Jacob had retraced his steps and followed me, but even as the conjecture presented itself, a second light flashed into sight, a light evidently parallel with the first and approaching at the same rate of motion. It needed no second thought to show me that these must be the carriage lamps of some private vehicle, though it seemed strange that any private vehicle should take a road professedly disused and dangerous. There could be no doubt, however, of the fact, for the lamps grew larger and brighter every moment, and I even fancied I could already see the dark outline of the carriage between them. It was coming up very fast and quite noiselessly, the snow being nearly a foot deep under the wheels. And now the body of the vehicle became distinctly visible behind the lamps. It looked strangely lofty. A sudden suspicion flashed upon me. Was it possible that I had passed the crossroads in the dark without observing the signpost? And could this be the very coach which I had come to meet? No need to ask myself that question a second time, for here it came round the bend of the road, guard and driver, one outside passenger, and 4 steaming greys, all wrapped in a soft haze of light, through which the lamps blazed out like a pair of fiery meteors. I jumped forward, waved my hat, and shouted. The mail came down at full speed and passed me. For a moment I feared that I had not been seen or heard, but it was only for a moment. The coachman pulled up, the guards, muffled to the eyes in capes and comforters, and apparently sound asleep in the rumble, neither answered my hail nor made the slightest effort to dismount. The outside passenger did not even turn his head. I opened the door for myself and looked in. There were but 3 travelers inside, so I stepped in, shut the door, and slipped into the vacant corner and congratulated myself on my good fortune. So it is the mail coach that he's been waiting for. The atmosphere of the coach seemed, if possible, colder than that of the outer air, and was pervaded by a singularly damp and disagreeable smell. I looked round at my fellow passengers. They were all 3 men, and all silent. They did not seem to be asleep, but each leaned back in his corner of the vehicle, as if absorbed in his own reflections. I attempted to open a conversation. "How intensely cold it is tonight," I said, addressing my opposite neighbor. He lifted his head, looked at me, but made no reply. "The winter," I added, "seems to have begun in earnest." Although the corner in which he sat was so dim that I could distinguish none of his features very clearly, I saw that his eyes were still turned full upon me, and yet he answered never a word. At any other time I should have felt, and perhaps expressed, some annoyance, but at the moment I felt too ill to do either. The icy coldness of the night air had struck a chill to my very marrow, and the strange smell inside the coach was affecting me with an intolerable nausea. Same. Certain smells make me nauseous too. Not even like gross ones. Like artificial, very chemical-based vanilla scents, like candles and body sprays and all that. Make me feel really sick. Those vanilla scented pine trees in like car air fresheners? No way. I shivered from head to foot, and turning to my left-handed neighbor, asked if he had any objection to an open window. He neither spoke nor stirred. I repeated the question somewhat more loudly, but with the same result. Then I lost patience and let the sash down. As I did so, the leather strap broke in my hand, and I observed that the glass was covered with a thick coat of mildew, the accumulation, apparently, of years. My attention being thus drawn to the condition of the coach, I examined it more narrowly, and saw by the uncertain light of the outer lamps that it was in the last stage of dilapidation. Each part of it was not only out of repair, but in a condition of decay. The sashes splintered at a touch. The leather fittings were crusted over with mold and literally rotting from the woodwork. The floor was almost breaking away beneath my feet. The whole machine, in short, was foul with damp and had evidently been dragged from some outhouse in which it had been mouldering away for years to do another day or two of duty on the road. So by outhouse, he means like outside building, not an outhouse as in like a porta potty type thing that we would call it. He means outhouse as in an outbuilding. You wouldn't be able to fit a coach in a modern outhouse or porta potty thing anyway. I turned to the third passenger, whom I had not yet addressed, and hazarded one more remark. "This coach," I said, "is in a deplorable condition. The regular mail, I suppose, is under repair." He moved his head slowly and looked me in the face without speaking a word. I shall never forget that look while I live. I turned cold at heart under it. I turn cold at heart even now when I recall it. His eyes glowed with a fiery, unnatural luster. His face was livid as the face of a corpse. His bloodless lips were drawn back as if in the agony of death, and showed the gleaming teeth between them. The words that I was about to utter died upon my lips, and a strange horror, a dreadful horror, came upon me. My sight had by this time become used to the gloom of the coach, and I could see with tolerable distinctness. I turned to my opposite neighbor. He, too, was looking at me with the same startling pallor in his face and the same stony glitter in his eyes. I passed my hands across my brow. I turned to the passenger on the seat beside my own and saw, oh heaven, how shall I describe what I saw? I saw that he was no living man, that none of them were living men like myself. A pale phosphorescent light, the light of putrefaction, played upon their awful faces, upon their hair dank with the dews of the grave, upon their clothes, earth-stained and dropping to pieces, upon their hands, which were the hands of corpses long buried. Only their eyes, their terrible eyes, were living, and those eyes were all turned menacingly upon me. A shriek of terror, a wild, unintelligible cry for help and mercy burst from my lips as I flung myself against the door and strove in vain to open it. In that single instant, brief and vivid as a landscape beheld in the flash of a summer lightning, I saw the moon shining down through a rift of stormy cloud, the ghastly signpost rearing its warning finger by the wayside, the broken parapet, the plunging horses, the black gulf below. Then the coach reeled like a ship at sea. Then came a mighty crash, a sense of crushing pain, and then darkness. It seemed as if years had gone by when I awoke one morning from a deep sleep and found my wife watching by my bedside. I will pass over the scene that ensued and give you, in a half-dozen words, the tale she told me with tears of thanksgiving. I had fallen over a precipice, close against the junction of the old coach road and the new, and had only been saved from certain death by lighting upon a deep snowdrift that had accumulated at the foot of the rock beneath. In this snowdrift I was discovered at daybreak by a couple of shepherds, who carried me to the nearest shelter and brought a surgeon to my aid. It's always the shepherds that are bringing these frozen people home. The surgeon found me in a state of raving delirium, with a broken arm and a compound fracture of the skull. The letters in my pocketbook showed my name and my address. My wife was summoned to nurse me, and thanks to youth and a fine constitution, I came out of danger at last. The place of my fall, I need scarcely say, was precisely that at which a frightful accident had happened to the North Mail 9 years before. I never told my wife of the fearful events which I had just related to you. I told the surgeon who attended me, but he treated the whole adventure as a mere dream born of fever in my brain. We discussed the question over and over again, until we found that we could only discuss it with temper no longer, and then we dropped it. Others may form what conclusions they please. I know that 20 years ago I was the fourth inside passenger in that phantom coach. And that is the end of The Phantom Coach by Amelia Edwards. I know this reading was a little bit shorter than the previous one, but basically what I do when I know I have to chop a story a little bit, I try to make it mostly like in half, but I also look for where it makes sense to put the break in the story. So it didn't make sense to me to put a break until our main character was set on the coachway and sort of everything was kind of starting to come together. So there we go. Oh, yeah, I quite like that story. And I like kind of the ambiguity of, so he talks about seeing the crossroads from when he's in the coach. So while he was walking, he hadn't quite gotten to that point yet where hopefully where he was expecting the actual male coach to have met him. So I sort of wonder, like, had he made it to that crossroads, is it possible that he would have been picked up by the actual male coach and not the phantom one? And did the old gentleman who fed him know what was going on? Like, was that his intention to send this man across this disused and dangerous coach road to meet up with the phantom coach? Did he do that on purpose? Was he legitimately trying to help and actually intended for this man, for our protagonist, to get on the real male coach? It's certainly interesting that this hermit-like figure that we know was sort of kicked out of the scientific community for believing in ghosts and saying, I know what I saw and I know what I believe. And in any other circumstances, the evidence and the witness statements, like in a court of law, that would be fine. But when we're talking about ghosts, all of a sudden it's not fine. And he kind of does have a point there. And he's now put our protagonist, this young barrister, into the same position where, like, he knows what he saw and he's adamant about his experience, but everybody else is just as adamant that he had some sort of weird fever dream brought on by likely hypothermia and and of course the result of his very real fall, because at the end of the day he did actually fall over the precipice where the old male coach did fall so many years earlier. So again, like the old gentleman had said, you're left with like actual physical evidence that something other than like leaving out eyewitness testimony and leaving out this guy's very real story that he had had this experience, or at least real to him, and dealing just purely with the fact that how did this guy who left this house in perfectly fine physical condition, how did he deteriorate so fast that he stumbled and fell off of a precipice on the side of the road? So you have, as the old gentleman has said, you have this very real physical evidence left from the experience as well, which the wider world has attempted to explain away in a very much non-supernatural way. So thank you for joining me for another scary story. This will likely be the last entrance in the Creepy Christmas playlist. So thank you for doing your part to help me revive this tradition of spooky stories in the holiday season. As always, please like, comment, subscribe, share the video around so that other people can find these great authors. If you have a request for a story, please just leave it in the comments section below. And I hope that you and your loved ones are safe and well. Goodbye, folks.